Good morning. My name is Karen Rohr. I am today's worship leader. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati. We're glad you're here. In this urban Unitarian religious community, we welcome all with love, support learning and spiritual growth, and serve our wider community. We work for justice, equity, and inclusion. If you are new to First Church and would like more information, send us an email. Our contact information is on our website at firstuu.com. Be sure to include your name, phone number, and email address so we can get back to you. And now we will hear our prelude. We light our chalice, the chosen symbol of our faith, with these words by Aisha Hauser and Susan Lawrence. We are Unitarian Universalists with minds that think, with hearts that love, and hands that are ready to serve. Together we care for our earth and work for friendship and peace in our world. Today, we are going to hear from 3 members of our congregation who are working to bring peace to our world: Amanda Lynch, Ann Wallace, and Kara Gapart-Uhl. Please join us now in singing our vision song. The words will appear on your screen.
We are a religious haven, welcoming wonder and spiritually free. With sustained by a loving tradition, moved and inspired by the future we see. Only seeking and working for justice, gently transforming lives through big, great, and small. Young and old, sharing meaning and mission, we joyfully offer our vision to all.
Long ago, in the forests of Russia, the Roma people traveled far and wide in separate bands. They camped in the forests and fields and made their fortunes in the villages they visited. Life was good when they were on the road and on their own. Life was good unless one group of Roma ran into another. Then, the chiefs were quick to disagree about everything, especially territory. The disagreements led to insults. The insults turned into fistfights. And before long, one and then another young man would die. When Micah was a small boy and he heard the wagons of the other Roma bands, he retreated into the folds of his mother's skirts and begged her not to let them fight. She shrugged her shoulders. What could she do? Barrow was the chief. She had no say. When Micah was a little bit older, he grabbed hold of his father and the other men and begged them not to fight. They shrugged their shoulders too. What could they do? It was Barrow who demanded they fight. They had no say. When Micah was a young man, he approached the leader of another band and begged him not to fight. The leader laughed at him and asked Micah if he was really a man. The fighting and unnecessary deaths were just a part of life, and nothing they could change. Micah's sorrow grew until finally he could not stand it anymore. He bid farewell to his family and disappeared deep into the forest. No amount of calling or searching could bring him back. He was gone. Micah had always been a gentle soul, but alone in the forest he grew bitter. Why had they not listened to him? Alone in the forest he grew angry, and eventually he died. And in his place came a night bird with a haunting call. Some years later, Micah's band returned to the place where he had disappeared. It felt ominous there, and yet they set up their encampment in the clearing. That evening, when the chores had been done and the campfire burned, no one sang or danced. They huddled by the fire without saying a word. It was a young boy who first heard the nightbird call. It seemed to be calling him. He felt he had no choice but to follow the sound of the bird into the forest. By the time his family realized he was gone, it was too late. They could not find him. All wanted to leave that place, and yet there was something that made them stay. The next night they huddled around the fire in silence again. It was a youth who heard the night bird call. Now it was calling him. He felt mesmerized as he followed the sound of the bird into the forest. By the time his family realized he was gone, it was too late. The next day, everyone wanted to leave that bleak place, but Barrow the chief would not, or could not, budge. He stood by the campfire all day. That evening, when the campfire burned, everyone could hear the night bird call, Barrow especially. "It is for me that the night bird calls," he said. "It has been after me all along, and it is I who must go. I am sorry for my warring ways. I have done wrong. The night bird calls for peace. When I go, so too shall go our warring ways." Barrow walked off into the forest, never to be seen again. After that, as though it were a catchy fiddle tune, peace spread throughout the land. The Russian Roma people began to live in harmony with one another. Since then, the night bird has continued to call, but its call is no longer hypnotic. Its call is a reminder of Barrow's pledge for peace. Let's hope that the night bird's call will continue to be heard today, and that the leaders all around the world will hear it. Perhaps we can call with it. My question for you today is this: what are some important steps for creating peace at home, in local communities, and around the world? Share your answer at coffee hour today or with family and friends this week.
Till this world is free from suffering. How long till rest and peace will reign? How long
Amanda Lynch is our first speaker. She works with the Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence. It is a nonprofit organization working to prevent gun violence through education, advocacy, and public awareness. It was founded in 1995 as a regional interfaith group in the Toledo area and has since evolved into a statewide leader in the gun violence prevention movement.
This poem was written by Violeta Esquivel, a 13-year-old in Los Angeles, California, and it's titled Generation Lockdown. Who would have thought sanctuaries would no longer be safe? Even churches and schools, safe spaces are lost. We've become Generation Lockdown. I was in first grade when the Sandy Hook shooting happened. That day, 27 young lives were taken. That week, my school put up an iron gate. As our parents dropped us off, we'd say goodbye through thick crimson bars that looked like a jail cell door. That week, parents all over America were reminded that life is as short as a moth's wing, and fear as commonplace as dishes in the sink. February 14th, 2018, I am in 6th grade, when Valentine's was not the same. Our hearts were broken that day, when 17 students in Parkland lost their lives to senseless gun violence. That year we marched for our lives. That week, our school got a full-time armed security guard. America never gets to heal when our wounds reopen again and again. There have been more mass shootings in 2019 than there have been days in the year. For now, I'll just lock down my heart. I don't want to prepare for the next bullet. Good morning. My name is Amanda Lynch, and I'm a member here at First Church, as well as a board member for the Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence. And in the context of today's conversation, I also point out that in my full-time role, I'm also a faculty member at UC, and I teach in the Public and Community Health Education program. So with nearly 40,000 deaths each year here in the United States, there's no question that gun violence is a public health issue. The Ohio Coalition Against Gun Violence is committed to addressing this issue through a public health approach by bringing partners and allies together and empowering them to take action using their own expertise and perspectives on this specific issue. So one of the first things that we do to address a problem in public health is to identify the risk and protective factors. When it comes to gun violence, the primary risk factors for experiencing injury or death by firearm are trauma and adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, being exposed to violent behavior, and gender and culture issues such as domestic violence and toxic masculinity. The most significant risk factor, though, is having access to firearms. This socio-ecological model is a framework that we often use in public health to address an issue on a variety of different levels. So using this model that you see here, we can examine both risk factors as well as intervention strategies at each of those different levels. When looking at prevention and intervention strategies around gun violence, and perhaps specifically focused on decreasing access to firearms, we could consider things like education and awareness at that individual level, safe storage for a firearm in the home at the interpersonal level. This could also include setting clear guidelines or expectations when visiting other people who might have a firearm in their home. So learning to ask that question of, do you have a firearm in your home, and is it stored safely? And then at those organizational, community, and public policy levels that we sometimes group together, we focus on strategies that we like to call policy, systems, and environmental change. So this could include things like closing the loopholes in laws around background checks. It can include waiting periods for purchasing, meaning that instead of being able to go into a store, quickly pass a background check, and walk out with a firearm within 15 to 20 minutes, we could be like other states that have waiting periods where you go in You start the process to purchase a firearm, and then you have to come back a couple of days later, and it could be 24 hours later, up to 7 days later, depending on the rule in the state, in order to purchase that firearm. And that can really help cut down on individuals who are experiencing crisis, whether that's related to suicide or domestic violence. If there's a little bit of time, it gives time for that crisis to kind of de-escalate, and the outcomes tend to be significantly better. These policy systems environmental changes could also include things like putting limits on how many firearms a person could purchase within a year, or limits on the amount of ammunition that a person can buy at one time. But this also includes things like addressing those cultural norms, like toxic masculinity, or addressing mental illness stigma. So again, this is a socio-ecological model very commonly used in public health and addressing public health issues. And then finally, when taking that public health approach, everything that we do has to be data driven. So we have to let the numbers guide where we focus our energies, as well as track those numbers so that we can evaluate what's working and what's not working, and where the at-risk populations are. So we use those numbers, or we use that data to identify the high-risk populations, and that also really helps us to define the problem and where it's happening. So when it comes to gun violence, the media would lead us to believe that gun violence is really only a problem when a mass shooting occurs. But in reality, the data tells us that less than 1% of firearm deaths in the United States are actually due to mass shootings. The majority of gun deaths in the US are actually suicides, and Kara's going to be telling you about that in a little bit. So I'll kind of point out some other areas of concern, so you can see some statistics here. For example, American women are much more likely to be killed with a firearm than women in other high-income countries, just as American children are significantly more likely to die from an unintentional shooting than their peers in other countries. So this data really drives us to take a comprehensive approach to gun violence. So again, at OCAGV, we really focus on thinking about those non-traditional partners where maybe their primary focus isn't gun violence prevention, but they still have a specific population or an issue in mind, and there's a connection to gun violence in some kind of way. So bringing together groups like the Children's Defense Fund of Ohio, the Ohio Domestic Violence Network, the Ohio Foundation for Suicide Prevention, allows for those non-traditional partners to come together and address the same issue that's taking so many lives here in the state of Ohio, as well as across the nation. So that's my kind of quick little spiel on the public health approach to gun violence. And if you want more info on this issue or the OCAGV, please visit our website. Thank you.
Ann Wallace is concerned about the increase in gun violence and sales in response to the pandemic, the continued push of the Ohio legislature to expand gun rights despite public opinion and the role of guns in American culture. She is especially focused on passing legislation to close the background check loophole. She works with Ohioans for gun safety.
Bang, bang. I'm angry, or I'm sick, or I'm frustrated, or I'm bullied. So sad. Bang, bang. What to do? Can't get care. They'll know I'm sick. Americans are strong. Americans are never weak. Bang, bang. In the street, in the bedroom, at the corner store, in our temples. Bang, bang. The hate you give, pervasive. Spread by bang, bang. Our workers at war, our faith at war, our children at war in schools. Bang, bang. No safety. Armed guards, Kevlar backpacks. And more bang, bang. The right to stockpile military weapons only in America. Can I be my own army? Bang, bang. 40,000 a year. Who will be next? Only in America. Chaos. Bang, 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 bang. This poem was written by Nicole Cook, the mother of 2 daughters who attended Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. One of her daughters fled the school with the shooter. The other daughter crouched under her desk for 20 minutes in room 1216 while shots were fired in her classroom, injuring 5 and killing 3 of her beautiful friends. Good morning. I'm Ann Wallace with Ohioans for Gun Safety. Amanda spoke about the public health crisis of gun violence. I'm going to briefly scan the politics of guns in the United States, just touching on a few key highlights, and really it is a fascinating history. In America, we've always had gun control. The founding fathers, in fact, instituted gun laws so intrusive that were they running for office today, the NRA would not endorse them. So who was not allowed to own guns? The founding fathers denied gun ownership to many. Among those were slaves and free blacks, and white men who refused to swear loyalty to the revolution. And for those who were allowed to own guns, actually federal law required every eligible man to purchase a military-style gun and ammunition for his service in the citizen militia. Fast forward to the 20th century and the modern history of the gun control movement. The issue of gun control took national prominence in the 1970s when guns became central to the identity of the Black Panthers. With armed Black Panthers standing on the grounds of the California state capitol, Republicans in California eagerly supported increased gun control. In fact, Ronald Reagan, then California's governor, is quoted as saying, "There's no reason why on the streets today a citizen should be carrying loaded weapons." Indisputably, for much of American history, gun control measures, like many other laws, have sadly been used to oppress Black Americans. Gun control legislation was not limited to California. In fact, the fear inspired by Black people with guns was so great that the United States Congress passed multiple new gun restrictions, particularly after the summer of 1967 brought what has been called the most intense and destructive wave of racial violence the nation has ever witnessed. Enter the new face of the NRA. Founded in 1871, in its early history, the NRA was at the forefront of legislative efforts to enact gun control legislation. Into the 1960s, following the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., the NRA actually supported the push for new federal gun laws, and they developed standards and trainings for safe gun use and storage. However, in 1977, at the NRA's annual meeting held actually right here in Cincinnati, a politically active wing of the NRA staged a coup which transformed them over time from an organization of hunters and fishermen focused on safe gun use into a lobbying powerhouse committed to an aggressive view of the Second Amendment. Their first political endorsement for president? Ronald Reagan in 1980, who had by then changed his tune about gun control legislation. So let's fast forward one more time to the politics of gun legislation in the present day. At the federal level, all gun safety legislation has been stalled by Republicans controlling the Senate despite the ongoing public health crisis of gun violence. Here in Ohio, in the aftermath of the mass shootings in Dayton, 1 year ago this Tuesday, August 4th, initial gun safety reform efforts that appeared to gain momentum throughout the end of 2019 have also been stalled by Ohio's Republican-led legislature. And in the wake of the pandemic, Ohio has seen significant increases in gun violence, including a 65% increase in homicides right here in Cincinnati, which, if they continue on pace, will hit triple digits for the first time in at least 2 generations. During this time, what have Ohio legislators done? Gun safety legislation has stalled. Instead, Republicans at the State House have advanced bills allowing the carry of concealed weapons without a license and stand your ground, like the bill or like a law used in Florida in defense of George Zimmerman after the murder of Trayvon Martin. All this despite the fact that the majority of Americans and Ohioans support numerous forms of gun safety legislation. 90% of Ohioans, for example, are in favor of comprehensive background checks. In short, our legislators are holding us hostage, denying the will of the people who elected them, beholden to special interests. It is for this reason that my work circumvents Ohio legislators via a citizen-initiated petition to enact comprehensive background checks in our state. I'm tired of our legislators' platitudes. I'm tired of their failure to enact common sense gun safety legislation. Tired that they listen to the voice of the gun lobby and ignore the voice of the people. How can you help? If you have not signed our petition for a citizen-initiated statute, you can commit to sign at www.ohioansforgunsafety.com. And if you have signed, either way, yes, if you have or haven't, you can encourage your friends, your family, your social media connections to commit to sign. Sadly, given the state of politics today, it is only through this type of citizen-initiated action that the voice of Ohioans will be heard. I hope you are spurred to act in whatever form it takes to work for change, to help ensure that we lift up the voice of the people of Ohio. Thank you.
Kara Gephardt-Uhl, our final speaker, works with Moms Demand Action, Kentucky. Moms Demand Action advocates for stronger laws and policies that will reduce gun violence and work in our communities to create a culture of gun safety. She will be talking about gun safety and how it relates to suicides.
Hi, my name is Kara Uhl, and I'm with the Northern Kentucky chapter of Moms Demand Action. And I'm going to start with a poem. It's called Letter Beginning with Two Lines by Shazla Melas. It's written by Matthew Olsman. You, whom I could not save, listen to me. Can we agree Kevlar backpacks shouldn't be needed for children walking to school? Those same children also shouldn't require a suit of armor when standing on their front lawns, or snipers to watch their backs as they eat at McDonald's. They shouldn't have to stop to consider the speed of a bullet or how it might reshape their bodies. But one winter, back in Detroit, I had one student who opened a door and died. It was the front door to his house, but it could have been any door, and the bullet could have written any name. The shooter was 13 years old and was aiming at someone else. But a bullet doesn't care about aim. It doesn't distinguish between the innocent and the innocent. And how was the bullet supposed to know this child would open the door at the exact wrong moment because his friend was outside and screaming for help? Did I say I had one student who opened a door and died? That's wrong. There were many. The classroom of grief had far more seats than the classroom for math, though every student in the classroom for math could count the names of the dead. A kid opens a door. The bullet couldn't possibly know, nor could the gun, because guns don't kill people. They don't have minds to decide such things. They don't choose or have a conscience. And when a man doesn't have a conscience, we call him a psychopath. This is how we know what type of assault rifle a man can be and how we discover the hell that thrums inside each of them. Today, there's another shooting with dead kids everywhere. It was a school, a movie theater, a parking lot. The world is full of doors, and you, whom I cannot save, you may open a door and enter a meadow or a eulogy. And if the latter, you will be mourned and then buried in rhetoric. There will be monuments of legislation, little flowers made from red tape. What should we do? We'll ask again. The earth will close like a door above you. What should we do? And that click you hear, that's just our voices, the deadbolt of discourse sliding into place. I met Joe when I was 16. We both worked at Kings Island. He was older, tall, had long blonde hair and an easy smile, always wore jeans and a gray t-shirt, and drove a motorcycle. The first time he called, I smiled so hard my cheeks ached by the end of the conversation. He soon became my first boyfriend. We dated the entire summer. By early fall, he had said, "I love you," but I did not. In the months following our breakup, Joe left love notes on my bedroom windowsill. In college, he called twice. the first time we talked. The second time, he left a distraught voicemail. I returned his call and left a short message. I never heard from him again. Several years later, his sister called with news. Joe had died by suicide months ago. Shortly before his death, his sister said he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Joe had written a few lines about me in his suicide note, but only now had she gathered the strength to call. I thought about the first time Joe called, how my cheeks ached. The ache had returned, but this time it was something much deeper. Not wanting to cry at work, I ran to my car and sobbed. Both the finality of what he had done and the fact that he had thought of me, even briefly, before he did it, sinking in. Once home, I reread his love letters to me. It was then I wanted so desperately to take back my silence, to tell him I loved him, not in a romantic sense, but in a you deserve to live a long life sense. But I can't, because Joe had access to a gun. According to Everytown for Gun Safety, 22,926 people die by gun suicide in the United States every year. Ohio has the 33rd highest rate of gun suicide deaths in the U.S. Kentucky, the 12th. And 68% of all Kentucky gun deaths are suicides. In Ohio, gun suicide among white men has increased by 55% between 2009 and 2018. 882 Ohioans die by gun suicide every year. Two years ago, on June 20th, my father-in-law, Marty, died by suicide. He was only 69. One of his last Facebook posts was the lyrics to Sweet Old World by Emmylou Harris. 6 months prior, he had moved back to Cincinnati. He was part of our everyday lives. We saw him often. Our family was blindsided. My husband and I found ourselves in the position of not only having to tell our kids that their grandpa died, but having to tell them how. Frantic research proved honesty and frankness to be best. No grief is worse than another's, but suicide does add complexity, especially when you have to explain to your young children what that word even means. Marty didn't use a gun. A few years prior to his death, a distant relative died by suicide in the family barn in Indiana. He had used a gun and a 6-year-old relative found him. I remember Marty commenting about the horrific mess a gun can make and how that child would need years of counseling. I can only assume Marty chose a different route to spare us a similar mess. The conversation around gun violence in the U.S. tends to focus on mass and school shootings and homicides. In fact, school shootings is one of the reasons I chose to join my local NKY chapter of Moms Demand Action. This group is a grassroots movement of Americans fighting for public safety measures that can protect people from gun violence. But it would be remiss to ignore the fact that nearly 2/3 of gun deaths in the U.S. are suicides. And according to Everytown, amongst commonly used methods of self-harm, firearms are by far the most lethal, with a fatality rate of approximately 85%. Conversely, less than 5% of people who attempt suicide using other methods will die, and the vast majority of all those who survive do not go on to die by suicide. While firearms are used in less than 6% of suicide attempts, over half of suicide deaths are with firearms. Access to firearms, meaning personal or household gun ownership, increases the risk of suicide by 3 times. Moms Demand Action works to pass stronger gun laws and close loopholes that jeopardize the safety of our families. Moms, with nearly 6 million supporters and chapters in every state, also works to create a culture of responsible gun ownership. I can't bring back Joe. I can't bring back Marty. But if I can show one family how to obtain a free gun lock so their teenager can't access a household firearm while under distress, if I can convince one legislature that an extreme risk or red flag law will help reduce instances of suicide by the temporary removal of firearms from people who are possibly a danger to others or themselves, then I feel as if I must. So sisters don't have to track down their brother's ex-girlfriends and share the horrific news. So mothers don't have to sleep with their children for nights on end with no good answer to the question, why? So we can reduce the risk of suicides by guns while working to increase access to mental health care for not only a better future, but a future period for all those we love and for all those who simply need a little help.
Today's offering will be split between these three wonderful organizations. You can give now or any time during the month of August. It is easy to give. You can text to 513-717-7377. You can go to Breeze and click on the Give Now line. Remember to put gun safety on the comments line. Or you can send a check to First Unitarian Church of Cincinnati at 536 Linton Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45219. Remember to put gun safety on the memo line. Please join me by reading the words on your screen as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our benediction today comes from Martha Capo Kirby. Into our world we entrust our spirits. May the strength we have gained from this communal hour sustain us as we resume the work that is at hand.